Good evening. My name is 𝘔𝘰𝘯𝘢, and I am the Director of Learning and Engagement here at ICALA, and we welcome you to tonight's program. It is a book talk with artist Dean Sameshima and superfan Andy Campbell. Yeah!
True superfan.
The book we'll be talking about is Being Alone, which has just been released on the occasion of a very recent exhibition of the complete photography series, Being Alone, at Soft Opening in London. We invited Andy Campbell to be in conversation with Dean about being alone, previous work, the urgency of documentary photography, and the memorialization of queer spaces. To keep my introductory remarks short, we have provided bio sheets on the speakers on each of your seats. In short, Dean is an amazing artist. Andy is an amazing historian, critic, and curator. And we're so happy to have this book launch here, and we're so happy to have the books here. They just made it here. They're fresh off the press, thanks to the support of Antonia Marsh of Soft Opening and Kristina Kite of Kristina Kite Gallery. Thank you both. And it's really great to be able to host this book launch while we still have the exhibition Scratching at the Moon, which was extended, and now we are doing 6-month runs of exhibitions. This is an exhibition co-curated by Anna Sue Hoy and Anne Ellegood that focuses on 13 intergenerational diasporic Asian American artists with deep ties to Los Angeles, whose practices are diverse and contributive to research, activism, pedagogy, and community. The exhibition includes selections of Dean's Being Alone series, as well as another work titled Traces No. 1. And this exhibition is closing soon. It will be on view until July 28th. We have a beautiful exhibition catalog available, and within it there are transcripts of conversations among the artists of the show. In a chapter that features a conversation with Dean Sameshima, Simon Leung, and 𝘚𝘬𝘢𝘐 Ra, they discuss each other's work. And I'd like to share an excerpt where Simon Leung offers a reflection on being alone. In the Being Alone pieces, it's almost as if you are charting a discourse on the very idea of the off-screen, of the off-scene, of the mise en scène, of the unseen, of the obscene, in other words. What are the parameters and what are the stakes in obscenity? That goes back to your earliest work of the sexy queer Asian male bodies. This thinking through light and the mechanics of light and the removal of light is a type of desire for something to be seen. And sometimes you need to remove what is seeable in order to see something that is difficult to see. We'll talk more about this as I now hand it to Andy Campbell and Dean Sameshima. Consider purchasing all the books. And thank you for coming.
Yeah, got to make the promo for the swag. The book is really beautiful, and thank you, 𝘂𝑰𝑗, and the team at the ICALA, Antonia and Kristina, of course. Thank you as well, and to Dean. Yeah, thank you for the year's worth of work. I think I want to start, before we really get into the conversation around the work that's here and kind of tracing a line through your work with maybe, if it's not like too indulgent, like a little full circle like story for me, which is that when I found out that I was going to be moving to LA to work at USC with the wonderful colleagues that I get to work with, I was actually installing a show with you in Houston, Texas. It was a small survey of your work, and I remember having these really great conversations with you about what LA was like and what I should expect from LA. It was a space that I had never really imagined myself in. And so for me, like, even though you're far away in Berlin and we see each other every now and then, you're this person that I kind of really connect LA to in many ways, not only because of the work and what the work does, but also because you were really, in many ways, a first introduction to kind of what LA is or could be. So for me, this is a really wonderful opportunity to kind of come full circle in LA to kind of address the work that you've been making for so long. So I think I want to start together.
I just want to say I'm very nervous. Speaking in front of people is not necessarily my favorite thing on the planet. So forgive me if I forget, and please allow me to change my mind next week if I say something and didn't quite follow through on it. So
I think I want to start here and just kind of let these two things up on the screen for a little bit before kind of moving into some of the work in the show. And these are two paintings from your recent Anonymous series, and they both, the text on them both says Anonymous Pictures, but they come for anybody who's kind of familiar with the visual culture of photography, photographic books, or recovery, actually, the visual culture of sobriety. You'll recognize some of the typographic kind of words here. So in each case, we have Anonymous, and then underneath it, Pictures. They're similar, but obviously not the same. They diverge in their referent points pretty remarkably, as we'll talk about later. The first one on the left, coming from the pictures, at least, coming from Robert Mapplethorpe's very famous kind of pictures, a sequence of photographs, 2 photographs, where he's writing the word pictures. And this is on the front and back cover of a photography book called Pictures. And on one side, he's got a business shirt, and on the other side, a leather glove. Yeah, exactly. And then the other one is from Douglas Crimp's Before Pictures, which is a memoir about kind of that critic and historian being aligned with pictures generations artists. And so, you know, these two referent points to photography are like quite divergent. So maybe we start here and just kind of talking a little bit about kind of maybe how this series came to be, and also how this might set up a kind of going back or thinking about photography for you.
yeah, I mean, you did such a great job with these pairings. I'm in such production mode at the moment in Berlin that I'll make these, pin them up, photograph them, put them in a pile. So I never really have time to spend, I don't have too much time to spend, you know, to play with them. So to see these together is really interesting because my introduction to contemporary art has been through photography. Especially like first commercial photography, I used to photograph bands. Then I got into fashion photography. I loved people like Herb Ritts, Bruce Weber, eventually 𝘔𝘰𝘯𝘕. Like that was kind of my entry point. And then of course, you know, eventually I found Robert Mapplethorpe. And so my introduction to people like Mapplethorpe was kind of mind-blowing because I didn't think, first of all, I didn't think, you know, that could be art, but then also be published in a book and for sale. Like, it really blew my mind. So that kind of like inspired me.
In terms of its graphicness, or in terms of kind of...
Yeah, because I mean, this is not something I ever, this was before the internet, before anything. Like, I never really saw that stuff published, but also beautifully. Like,
Right.
the composition, the contrast, it was really kind of mind-blowing. Like, oh, this is art, or this could be art. S&M, fisting could be art. It was really kind of a click in my head, like a really important moment. And then, you know, as time went on, I you know, the pictures generation also kind of like was a big inspiration. Like, oh, this could also be art. Photography was a big thing for me. So to have these kind of two examples together is a nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a way in which this series, and I think a lot of your recent work, and maybe this is a good kind of segue to go into one of the works that's in the gallery called Traces Number 1. A lot of your recent work is not only, I mean, I don't want to pigeonhole it into only re-narrating the personal or your personal history, but it does dig back into kind of some of the photographs that you've made kind of over your career. And this work in particular does that, as it picks up work from various series and kind of puts them all in a line together, recontextualizing them a little bit. So maybe you can kind of give us, you know, what we're going to do is kind of go back and forth in your kind of trajectory and think about kind of past work and present work
Uh-huh.
kind of back and forth. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the structure of this work, kind of how it came to be and what's incorporated into it.
Yeah.
And we can look at kind of the individual pieces.
coming up, yeah.
Yeah.
This piece, I thought of this piece specifically for this exhibition. I've been sort of digging through my archives and my negatives, my 35 millimeter negatives, and I've realized I have hundreds of point and shoot photographs I've been taking since like late 80s. And I was really trying to figure out what to do with these because on their own, they're not necessarily spectacular images, but I thought it was important to kind of dig this stuff out and present them somehow. And so for the exhibition, I printed them out in my studio, maybe about 50 different images from the 90s to now, from LA to Berlin. And this was kind of the first selection I did. Yeah.
And you knew that it was going to be the start of a series, or because you've titled it Number One,
Yeah,
right?
Number
So
One.
it
Yeah,
seems
yeah,
to
yeah.
kind of indicate like there's
yeah.
numbers to come.
Yeah, there's
you
more
know?
that's going to come about
Yeah.
just because I have so much to, I think, should be exhibited and
Yeah.
shown. Because also a lot of these places are no longer around. Or certain things aren't as, I mean, I don't really see graffiti like that anymore. So, yeah, I think it's, and the bed image, that's Roman Holiday, which also closed down recently. It was on Venice Boulevard in Venice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you contextualize what Roman Holiday is?
Oh, it's a
yeah, not everybody.
bathhouse.
It's a bathhouse. Okay. Yeah.
It was about
Was. Yeah.
the image. Also, this is the first time I'm putting a self-portrait in a work. This was at 1350, which also closed. It was a bathhouse, closed 2 years ago.
Recently. Yeah.
And that was in 1997 after a breakup. Self-portrait, yeah.
And was this? We're going to address In Between Days without you, but this is around the same time.
It's
It's the exact same time.
Yeah, a lot of these photos are things I would do out of boredom, out of just wanting to document something, just to have it for myself, not thinking it was going to be art. Again, like a lot of these were like, if it was 88, 89, I didn't even think I was going to be an artist at that point. It was just me wanting to document these kind of like adventures. Yeah.
And how did you keep the photographs you took from that time? Did you keep them in albums? Did you? Yeah. With like the clear plastic pages.
Yeah.
From the Roosterfish.
Roosterfish.
And then from what then was Gauntlet 2, right?
Cuffs.
On the or was it Cuffs?
That's
okay.
Cuffs, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Now closed.
Now closed. Yeah. I mean, there's a way in which kind of this work, I mean, returning to this work now because so many of these spaces are no longer extant or have changed in very dramatic ways. You know, it can be read through this kind of lens of, and certainly your work has been written about through the lens of kind of like mourning on the one hand for something that's lost or nostalgia for something. What does returning to it now do for you? Like, what is it doing kind of in the now as you're lining them up?
God, I don't know. It's not nostalgia. It's just,
Right.
I think it's just a document that I think of LA, of Berlin in the future pieces. It's just something that I think it just has to be something that has to be, for me, remembered. I think it was a very important part of LA history. There's things, and things kind of shift so quickly these days. And yeah, I think there's just elements that, you know, I mean, Cuffs was such a legendary space. I think generations that come up may be interested in that, maybe not, but yeah.
So it kind of works in a memorial mode a little bit, or
Very much
is that
so.
too like?
I think that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, memorial or just remembrance. Yeah.
And you've been doing something similar, albeit in a different kind of way, with some recent paintings where you've started to kind of, and you've done this in paintings before, where you've layered sometimes the same image, sometimes different images, but never this, I mean, maybe it's unfair to say, but maybe never this like cacophonous, never like so many images all at once, it feels like.
Yeah.
So is something similar happening here? I mean, we have like, you know, the photograph of the no cruising sign, you know, these turnstiles, which you were photographing for a while. Yeah, how are these kind of working in the same or maybe a different mode? And then we'll go back to some of those early photographs.
Okay, yeah, I mean, right now I'm back to making silkscreen paintings. For the past several years, I was like just doing photography, and I needed kind of a break from looking at a screen or like looking at a photo and trying to figure out contrast and color and all that sort of stuff. So I break away by doing these silkscreen paintings, and it started off, you know, with the connect the dot number paintings. And then I came back, when I was in London, I saw a Rauschenberg show, and I never thought of Rauschenberg before as an inspiration. I always thought of Warhol as far as silk screening. And in this Rauschenberg show, he had his gigantic paintings and also black and white photographs framed. So the photos that were framed were used in these compositions.
In the paintings, yeah.
And I thought, and they're not, for me, they're not spectacular images. They're really, they're forgettable. But how he was able to use these into these paintings with, you know, color and just layering was really, it just clicked for me. I was like, oh my God, I never thought of Rauschenberg before. And then I thought, well, this is another way for me to use the images, kind of like traces,
right,
onto paintings. So, I mean, this is brand new. That title might change next month. This was, Andy got this from Instagram.
Yes. there are quite I can call them out when they come up. There are quite a few from Instagram here. Yeah.
The title may change.
Yeah. but
it's changed twice already, actually.
Has it really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is this not accurate anymore?
No, that's the latest one.
Okay.
But it was something else before
that. Okay. And a lot of them have a index as a background.
Index and connect the dots.
And connect the dots.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I've kind of I've been just wanting to do these kind of paintings, and I've been just needing to have something other than the dots, other than text, something to add to the composition, to add more colors, to just make it a more comfortable looking painting.
And the index is from where?
They are from The Joy of Gay Sex from 1970 something. There's lyrics to How Soon Is Now by the Smiths. There's the table of contents from A Lover's Discourse. Yeah.
And those are the things that you return to. Those are the screens that you have,
also
essentially.
notes that I've taken.
Right.
Like in, I think it was
Right, you
1999.
can kind of see some of that, like here. Yeah, right.
I think it's
Bruce Hainley.
Oh yes, it's Bruce.
Which is apropos for today because Bruce Hainley did the essay for the book that is for sale. So
yeah, I found these
read a little bit
pages
from
that I had from grad school, and for some reason, you know, the top half were studio visits from people. So those were notes, and then the bottom half were ads, people responding to my ad on a phone sex app or phone sex line. So people would respond to my ad and they would describe themselves and what they were looking for, and I would just take notes.
You'd write it down.
Yeah, before time was up. Yeah. So I use also those as a backdrop as well, or sometimes layered on top.
Yeah. So let's go back a little bit and really go dig. So we're gonna play the hits, but we're also gonna have some deep cuts here. Okay. Among the deep cuts are some images that you took of tea room signs, as well as tea rooms, cruising spaces, public restrooms in the South Bay. You grew up in the South Bay, so this was a place that you were familiar with, and the signs were something that you were noticing. You know, when did it occur to you to kind of start, and this informs a later series of work that you do, connected bodies of work called Wonderland under the series heading Wonderland, which is composed of graffiti on the wall, much like what you see in Traces, images from Griffith Park, right?
Yep.
And then kind of the outside of sex clubs. But when did it occur to you to start kind of photographing the kind of physical parts of cruising spaces?
Yeah.
And how did that kind of come for you?
I think it was working at the Mocha bookstore and finding out about a photographer named Louis Baltz. And then I saw these photos and I thought they were very, very sexy. And I didn't read the text or anything like, but they just looked so interesting. This was in undergrad or very early undergrad. So I was just like, wow, there's something happening, something sinister happening behind these walls, behind these buildings. And that's what clicked for me with starting to, and the Beschers as well.
Right. 𝘔𝘰𝘯𝘬𝘀𝘀.
Yeah. But then I would go out using a 35 millimeter. And then I met with, in undergrad, I met a few times with Alan Sekula. And he said, why don't you act like a real photographer?
Whoa.
Yeah. And I loved it. So I think, so what I started to do with these that you're seeing up above was I started to use a Fuji 6x9, which was a really good camera for architecture, a medium format. And so that's when I started to really focus on the facades in the way that is very much like the Beschers and inspired by Baltz for sure.
And you also did photograph some interiors, and for those who want to see some of these photographs, I encourage you to go to the One archives and look up Steam Magazine, which was it was a quarterly journal, very much in a kind of academic mode, although put together by Scott O'Hara. It had reviews of cruising spaces, movie reviews, long-form pieces about kind of mostly gay male kind of social scenes and spaces. And your photographs illustrate some of these like reviews of specific like tea rooms.
Scott was the first person to publish my photographs. I think this was right before undergrad. And I was thrilled. I was so excited. Yeah. I think I used my name.
Dean Sameshima.
I actually used my real last name, which is kind of freaky thinking about it. Yeah. Because I don't know. But I was so proud. Yeah, that was my first publication.
What did it mean? I mean, what did it mean knowing, did you know who Scott O'Hara okay. Yeah.
Scott O'Hara was a porn star.
Yeah.
Who unfortunately passed away of AIDS. But so yeah, I found these in, I found a few copies in a different like bookstore when it was in West Hollywood. And of course, it was like when someone told me about John Ritchie, when I saw Steam, I was like, oh my God, this person, you know, because cruising was something that, especially growing up in the 80s, coming of age, you know, my sexual being, I fear was all around us, right? So cruising was kind of looked down upon. Public sex was looked down upon.
Well, the consequences were and remain very real, right? If someone gets busted for cruising,
in the US,
they get registered as a sex offender, right? So it's like, so that...
Well, no, you don't have to... No. I got arrested in 90-something, I forgot. But you don't register.
You don't, okay.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, so for this person to kind of validate my existence, kind of like how John Ritchie did.
Yeah.
And to publish my photo, it really meant the world to me. Yeah. It really kind of pushed me. It's like, oh, maybe this is the direction I really want to go, and maybe it's okay because at least this guy will get it. You know.
And there was a place for it.
There was a place for it. And
right.
An audience, maybe a small audience, but
an audience.
Someone will see my photo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The best part about, I mean, in addition to like the amazing kind of gonzo writing and your photographs in some instances, you know, is this kind of like, you know, parody of academic journal culture too. Yeah. Like it's like, you know, it's very clearly very smart.
Yeah, Scott was good.
And soon, fairly soon thereafter, you kind of embark upon this sequence of photographs, which maybe kind of like an early kind of coming together of lots of these different kind of threads that you were already kind of thinking about. And around the same time, you are going, or, you know, similar, you're going to shows, taking pictures at club events that you're at music shows that you're at. You're thinking about the various ways that cruising is changing, right, because of internet technology. I mean, you talked a little bit about the telephone line.
Yeah.
But there's a whole sequence of work that really starts thinking about, well, what is, internet cruising?
And also struggling with representation.
Right.
It's something I still kind of, I don't necessarily think I struggle with it, but it's always in the back of my head. How do I say this? It seems like when queer artists photograph or paint communities, it tends to be people that do not look like me. So I always struggle with representation, bodies, and the Club Kids was after,
That was a little later.
it was a little after
Yeah.
the sex clubs.
Yes.
The sex clubs, I wanted to make sure not to include any human beings. I wanted to make sure there was no sort of demographic stamp on what kinds of people go to these spaces. I wanted, with the landscapes, I wanted to imply something happened, maybe like a crime scene, which literally, public sex is a crime in the US, not in Germany. So I wanted to play on that aspect. The Club Kids, it's not the proper title, but that came a little bit later. That was my, yeah.
But there are moments where you do, yes, there are these really important moments where you depict these places kind of unpeopled, without kind of a demographic attached. I like the way that you were kind of putting that. But, to return to that idea of the pictures generation too, there are these moments where you're doing a little bit of a kind of distanced representation of a kind of seeing. So, in one of your very few video works, I'm sorry to pull this out, it is Boys in My Bedroom, which is really like a VHS compendium of cute guys that you're seeing on TV, and it's like one after the other, flipping channels,
not being able to do anything else but
right. And with these, correct me if I'm wrong, but with these, it's noticing someone and photographing them until they notice you back.
Yeah,
Right.
this I felt more okay with representation because I wasn't really going into a private space. It was a Britpop club,
Right.
So, and again, going back to my early inspiration of photography, I would take classes before I went to art school. I would take classes at Art Center at night and community college to learn how to print, how to process and develop black and white film. So, and I learned early on, I'm not the greatest photographer. I'm not.
Meaning what? Meaning
I tried fashion and it failed. I tried concert photography and it was just always a head in front of me. It didn't quite work. And same with these. All I wanted to do was kind of have a really good photo of a hot guy who I thought was hot. And so I would just kind of snap until they maybe noticed and I would just hide my camera. And then when I was in graduate school, I started just printing them out, seeing maybe I could get a nice 11 by 14 for my bedroom or something. Mm-hmm. But then I thought, oh, these are kind of like Muybridge for me, this kind of motion photography. And I thought, kind of like the traces, they're not extraordinary on their own, but maybe as a sequence, it's a little more interesting. So that's...
Well, I kind of want to that may have been true for you, but I think it would be really hard to make that argument when looking at some of your more recent photographic series. And obviously, part of the reason we're here is to celebrate the launch of this book that is dedicated to this series, which in the tradition of great photo books is just as much a kind of document of the series of the work and is a work kind of in and of itself as, the photographs themselves are. But, if we kind of zoom, and some of them are here, some of them are also up at the Venice Biennale right now. But if we zoom in, this is not someone who's not in control of
no. I spent years with composition. These were taken with my smartphone. And I worked on these for a few years to just make them look like analog photography. So I do know composition.
Yes.
I do know
Yeah.
grain,
Yeah.
contrast. I did spend a long time figuring that out. But yeah, no, these I think are beautiful. It's one of my favorite things I've ever made.
And it is one of these series that is not entirely unpeopled. Like there are, I mean, part of what defines the series is that there are people in them, one person per photograph, right? There's two in one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but generally one person. And sometimes you can tell throughout the series that you're in the same space just at a different time. Like you'll see the like acoustic tiling on the space, like in one, and or the pipes kind of rolling kind of on the side of the wall. You know, we'll turn to what Bruce Hainley says about this work in just a minute, but how are you thinking about these and kind of the various places that they're going? I mean, it is a pretty new series of work, but you say you're very proud of them. It's something that you feel very good about. You know, what is it to you that you think this hits, that you've kind of been trying to do?
I think individually they're beautiful.
Yeah.
They stand on their own. But yeah, unlike the others, I mean, these are just well thought out, in my opinion, well thought out photographs on many levels. I mean, these kind of came by accident. Starting around 2015, when I would go into these types of spaces in Berlin, I would just, there's a lot of downtime sometimes, and in this downtime, I need something to do. So I would just kind of like, you know, look at the architecture, look at the space, look at the floors, look at, you know, there's not a lot to photograph really, but you know, I'm just trying to keep my mind busy, right, in between things. And so in 2020, when the first lockdown happened, I had plenty of time to kind of like go through my archives of just phone photos, which is like hundreds. And so these kind of came by accident. I started to notice something that kept when I kept seeing them, something that kept popping in my head was Tony Conrad's screens, which I love those works so much. So I was like, oh, I mean, and these are all color. They were all color as well. So I was kind of like inspired by that, but I was also thinking about Walker Evans's Subway series. Mm-hmm. I've always wanted to do a project like that. And I never knew who, what, when, where, or how. And I think this was my kind of answer to that for myself. And because if you see the Walker Evans photos, a lot of them will have the people, you know, the portraits, and then the windows in the back behind them. So this is kind of like in dialogue.
It's kind of play
with
on that,
that kind of, and apparently he did like 600 of them. I did too, but I just happened to narrow them down to 25. So, and of course, I wanted to keep the people as anonymous as possible. I've even, through Photoshop, adjusted a few of the hair cuts because they looked pretty identifiable. So I kind of...
You want to keep them.
Yeah.
I mean,
as plain as possible.
Yeah, as plain, but also like, you know, as we'll talk about, anonymity is a kind of important aspect of a lot of the spaces that you historically have been photographing, but continue to kind of think about. And so, you know, that's also a care for the other people that show up in these spaces. It's not, you don't want to kind of accidentally out somebody, you know, who is in one of these spaces because you are a photographer taking pictures in the space. You know, like I think there's a kind of ethics problem with that, you know, in a certain way.
And also I just, you know, again, don't want to put any kind of like racial, ethnic demographic, even gender.
Leave it open. Yeah. I just want to kind of show you a little excerpt of Bruce Hainley's really kind of wonderful, like, kind of referential kind of essay that kind of bounces around between kind of artistic and filmic references and personal back and forth with you. So Dean's white screens, it's not so much that they contain, but rather inherit that general idea of survival. He had just been talking about general idea in the essay. Does that sound too grand? if not survivors, then those who daily low-key survive, which is to get through the day in the hope, white light, white heat of touch or exchange or recognition, right? So thinking not only about kind of like what the photographs depict, but also about kind of what the experience of being in the space
The human condition
is,
yeah.
right? And kind of what the human haptic experience of kind of being in the spaces. Because I think there's a way in which like a photograph like this, you know, or like these photographs could be seen as could be misinterpreted as like over formal in a certain way, right? And because there are people that are like here, you know, like you are putting emphasis on the human in these spaces, on people kind of actually being in the spaces, either with each other or, as the series says, kind of being alone.
Before and after.
Yeah. And this is in dialogue too. I mean, I think I want to bring in a couple of like outside reference as we kind of talk about this, and then we'll move on to the anonymous, maybe we'll skip ahead to the kind of anonymous paintings, and then take a couple of questions from the audience. But, you know, you've cited 𝘚𝘤𝘰𝘯𝘨 before as a major influence, and maybe you want to kind of chat a little bit about kind of how you came to that work or kind of what the influence is. And then, you know, in this recent presentation at the Venice Biennale, your work is put into dialogue with Miguel Ángel Rojas's pinhole and kind of cruising kind of work. So maybe talk, and I don't know if Miguel Ángel Rojas was new for you from the show? Okay. Yeah, so maybe talk about an influence that has been with you for a long time versus one that's kind of quite new for you.
Well, I mean, 𝘚𝘬𝘰, I don't think he was an early inspiration. It was just one of these bodies of work, again, like reading John Recchi or being included or seeing Steam for the first time. It was just someone I was like, oh, a Japanese man is documenting Asian men mostly, and you know, dealing with sexuality. I've never seen that before in this kind of way. And they're cruising, and half of the photos are heterosexuals, right? It's men and women.
Yeah.
So it was just about this identification, because, I mean, yeah, just to see another kind of like body of work that kind of aligns with myself, with what I'm interested, but he's using bodies, I wasn't.
Right.
Miguel's work, I didn't know about till recently. Like a friend of ours, Stuart Comer, who works at MoMA, has these in the MoMA collection. And when I had a show in New York, he said, oh, you should check out this guy's work. So I didn't know about Miguel Angel Rojas. And then when Adriano Pedrosa from the Venice Biennale, we were emailing back and forth, and eventually he says, oh, I want to put you in the same room as Miguel. And I was like, this is such a weird, amazing connection, because I didn't know about that work until recently, the past few years. So yeah, it's an honor to be in a room with him.
So let's talk a little bit through a couple of recent series too. Just spend a few minutes on each. This is, you'll have to correct my German pronunciation. 𝘚𝘤𝘰𝘯𝘨, right?
Yep.
Okay. Which is German for
Strawberry mouth.
Strawberry mouth. Okay, because
it's a chain of really popular porn shops in Germany. They sell sex toys, and they also, some of them have porn theaters up above. These are from the one in Berlin that shut down in 2020, not because of COVID, but because of the property. The block it was on was purchased by someone else. So yeah, and again, it was this urgency of just like, I didn't know it was gonna close, but I was just like, I have to go into this space. I had some nice phone photos, but in my head I was like, okay, you have to go in properly with a better camera and document these things, because
and the idea
with the internet and with apps like this kind of stuff, I think I fear that, closure. So it's like, let's try to photograph as much as possible before it moves on. to something else.
And the idea was to photograph the view from both sides, right? Which is why they're paired together. So you're getting kind of both views through the both views through the whole. Yeah. And then I want to also show a little bit of 𝘤𝘬𝘀𝘀𝘀, which is what has been an ongoing series for you. This is something that people will recognize.
No one wants to talk about.
No, what? Why?
I don't know.
Well, let's talk about it.
I love this work. Are you kidding?
Because
I don't know if it's evident, but when I was here in 2020, January 2020, and I was in some exhibition. I was visiting an exhibition at the Hammer, and I believe 𝘚𝘤𝘀𝘀𝘀 curated a show, and there's these Felix Gonzalez Torres stacks, and I was like thinking about, I've seen his work many times before, but for some reason I was thinking of this idea of looking down really stuck in my head. I never thought of it before. And so a few months later, the first lockdown happened, COVID happened, and things shut down in Berlin. And I got a little antsy. I worked a lot less. I cleaned people's apartments in Berlin for my work. And when COVID hit,
there was none of that.
We didn't know what to do. So I, fortunately or unfortunately, didn't work very much. And the streets were kind of empty. It was very weird. And also in Berlin, Germans are very uptight about being in photographs. Even if you're on the street, I was taking a picture of a tree one time, and this guy came up to me. He was like, "Delete that now."
Yeah.
I was like,
Amen.
It was it was a ginkgo tree, and I didn't even see you in the thing. I mean, he came so close to me.
He knew, though.
So anyway, I thought about this idea of looking down. And what happens a lot, especially in the spring, which is when the first COVID lockdown happened, a lot of Germans, a lot of Berliners especially, put out boxes of stuff to give away, which I think is very beautiful and generous. But also it can tell a lot about the people living in Berlin, which is very diverse. So I then started to do this in 2020.
Sometimes empty by the time you get to them.
Yeah.
But there are whole histories.
I mean, this one's amazing. The VHSs with, the person was obviously gay because there's a lot of queer films, Friends, Ally McBeal. Which I used to love.
Goes along with those things. Yeah, right.
I really wanted to take it home, but I didn't have a German VCR.
Why do you think it is that of the series? I mean, there's something that's obviously so. Obviously, when you're taking pictures inside of porn theaters or sex clubs, there's this kind of air of illicitness or of sexuality or bodies doing something, and here that kind of sexuality component is. I mean, it's not as, you could, just as you just did with this, you could make the argument that it's here still, obviously, but what do you think it is about, people maybe not kind of responding as well to kind of what this is and what it's doing?
They'll catch up.
I think so too.
No,
yeah.
I think because
that's what we're doing right now.
It's not it's not overtly or in any way necessarily connected to what I'm known for or what I do more so on a regular basis.
Right, but I guess kind of the argument that I would make is that it's about where you look, right? And it's about kind of the politics of where you look, right?
And
which is representation of the body.
Yeah.
You could connect it really strongly conceptually, obviously,
I think so, yeah.
right, to the rest of your work. Yeah. But it doesn't, again, if you're taking as the kernel or the nut of the work, that it's about sexuality, and about sexual, scenes, then you miss something like this, actually, right? Yeah. So let's jump ahead and kind of finish out. I'm gonna skip a few things and skip ahead to some of the more recent anonymous paintings that you've been doing, and these kind of come on the heels in many ways of kind of representational paintings of documents, various kinds of documents, a lot of books, some film receipts. There's a whole kind of thing around that.
Arrest record.
The rest, yeah. I mean, just because you called it out earlier, you know, the big kind of against nature polyptych, like, which is basically a repainting of your arrest record, which actually lists the Mocha bookstore as your place of employment.
Yep.
And I think that's important because both you mentioned it as a place of learning and kind of coming into oneself, but it's also this place where, like, okay, like that's the same year, that's the same year as the LA riots. It's also the same year as Helter Skelter at Mocha. It's also the same year as the Katie Nolan show.
Yeah,
it's like, I mean, and this is also, it's around the same time that you're getting these incredible shows at Lace and at other kind of Los Angeles institutions, Against Nature, you know, Exhausted Autumn, all of which you've kind of repainted as these kind of grand, I mean, I kind of think of them as like history. I mean, they're quite literally history paintings.
I thought of them as still lives.
As still lives, yeah. But they're like, they're this history of kind of being in this place as a young artist and kind of learning, of learning about kind of what the world, what the artistic world can be.
Mocha was a great education, I must say.
In what way?
Well, again, there's a lot of downtime when you work, or when I worked in the bookstore. And so all we did was like look and read art books, magazines, you know, all day long. And also when I worked there, you know, if you got to work early, you could walk through the galleries all by yourself. So they have these amazing skylights, the lights aren't on, and you could experience like the pop show alone, which was
without lights.
Without light, and Katie Nolan.
Yeah.
It was like, what is that?
Yeah.
You know, it's my first time experiencing her work. I don't even think I saw it reproduced ever. Right. So walking through the space, you're like, what the hell is this pile of stuff? You know, it was really that was up when I first started working. It was really amazing. Yeah, it expanded my idea of what art can be, for sure.
Right. I mean, I think there's a way in which kind of these jobs, and there was a recent show at Stanford that was about day jobs, artists kind of day jobs. Mm-hmm. The jobs that we hold are the jobs that we take, and I think you could actually connect kind of your job house cleaning also to the 𝘰𝘰𝘯𝘏 Schenken, because you're moving around the city and
also figuring out
looking
at people's trashes could be really telling.
Sure. So I think there's a way to kind of connect all of that stuff. But I mean, even just looking at kind of like what was there at the time,
incredible.
I mean, like it becomes a little bit of a kind of like interpretive kind of tablet to some of what's going into your work, right? Mm-hmm. So when we come back, you know, you're doing these kind of still lives or history paintings, and you've started to recombine them in this format of anonymous, then blank, kind of underneath. And so oftentimes you can trace the source. I mean, I can kind of figure out generally kind of where they are. So in this case, it's Tea Room Trade, which is this very famous study of kind of the sociology of tea rooms. Anonymous Faggots, which takes as its, as I mentioned before, the anonymous comes from the Alcoholics Anonymous kind of big book, but Faggots is a novel by Larry Kramer, and you've made one that's based on the first edition hardcover. You've also made one that's based on the first edition, like paperback.
There's actually a pink version,
and there's a pink version as well. Mm-hmm. And so in the Venice Biennale, one of these other versions from Anonymous Faggots. I mean, so it's not just about kind of taking the idea and just replicating it once, you know. In many instances, you're just like with pictures, you're replicating it kind of multiple kind of times. And what I like about that is that it's, there's heterogeneity in the series. Like Faggots is not just one thing, right? Like it's not coded one way through color, not coded one way through typography. It's like kind of, it comes in multiple ways, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's all books within my library.
Right.
So all the different editions get printed out into, and I use the colors were kind of informed by the books themselves.
By the book, right? Because if you look at the paperback, there's a little kind of pink undertone.
Well, there's
another one.
There's a paperback that I have that is pink. That
is that's actually pink, so hot pink like this.
Yeah, that's where the hot pink and the white came from. Yeah.
And then you also kind of take a look back also at things that you're personally involved with, like Anonymous Loss takes its bottomed kind of typography from this really key kind of anthology by David Eng and David Kazanjian. But Suzette Min wrote an article about your work, about In Between Days Without You, which is the series that's replicated on the right side of this image. The series from which, just to like go all the way back, the series from which this self-portrait is kind of an outtake from, right?
Exactly.
In that essay, she talks about this series in relation to melancholy and mourning, but that's also the same anthology that a very famous Fred Moten essay is in. Douglas Crimp's Melancholy and Moralism, I think, is in that essay, in that collection. It's a very kind of important kind of collection in thinking about kind of queer practices, queer and fugitive kind of practices at the time. And just to return, maybe, here, and then finally to the book, you know, like, what's interesting about this practice, at least to me, of kind of the anonymous blank, the anonymous faggots, anonymous pictures, anonymous loss, anonymous, you know, is that, like, it is indelibly you in a certain way. Like, these are all influences that have kind of worked throughout your work. Like, you can actually kind of pick out these things and kind of trace them across your work. And so although Anonymous connects to you in a very personal way, you know, sobriety connects in a very personal way, it's not quite the case, you know, that the painting functions anonymously, right? And they're really kind of meant to be a kind of collective portrait of like what you digest, like what's been important to you.
What I've held on to.
Yeah.
But also, one of the main inspirations was John Rechy's Sexual Outlaw. In the first few pages, he says for all the anonymous outlaws, right?
Yeah, I added it. Yeah.
And for my mother.
Yeah.
Which is really
so the memory of my mother.
But again, for him to say dedicate it to all the anonymous outlaws, it was another one of those moments of like, oh, this is for me. This is for me. This is, you know, at a time where I had very few people to talk to about this kind of stuff. It was like to read about it, to have this man write several novels about this kind of stuff was really important for identification. So that's kind of like where these portraits, what I call portraits, kind of stemmed from.
Well, and it also comes back because if you buy the book and look at the kind of colophon, and this was just posted to your Instagram, so this is another Instagram poll. I'm sorry, but you know, it says for all the anonymous outlaws. Yeah. So there's a kind of replication, you know, of this, and you know what we didn't talk about is there's a whole sequence of paintings about images of John Rechy. There's a whole sequence of paintings about numbers, which is also connected to John Rechy. So this is someone who comes back kind of again and again, still alive, right?
He's in his 90s,
Yeah. So I think maybe with that, we should like open out for a couple of questions, maybe, if there are some in the audience, and then kind of let everyone talk and mingle for a little bit after that. So if there are a couple of questions, we'll gladly take them, or Dean will gladly take them. I will shut up.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah.
Hello. So in, I don't know, I think the coronavirus has affected everybody, as we know, and I was wondering, in terms of like how do you process these certain periods or gaps in one's sort of output in terms of I mean, I don't know, in March of 2020 I was in Frankfurt, and like I just finished a semester or something, and basically like getting like the death stare and stuff, and just sort of was like sort of like feeling weird and all that. But like I was wondering like how you like navigate this combined aspect of both being I mean, I don't know, just being an American in Germany, but then also yada, 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 you know?
Asian.
Yada, yada.
Yeah.
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 How do I navigate that? Oh, I don't know. I don't know if I can. How do I navigate that
Yeah.
to my work? Oh my lord.
Would it help to go back to the Verschenken or the?
I haven't, I don't know the answer to that yet. I don't know.
Well,
It's a good question, but how do I navigate that?
What is it? I mean, you moved to Berlin when?
2007.
Mm-hmm. And what were those first few years like for you there?
A blur.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I went to Berlin for all the wrong reasons, I say, and I stayed for all the right ones. Yeah, the first 3 years I don't remember, but you know, I don't know how do I navigate that? I don't think that way when I'm walking around, really. I mean, every once in a while, I'm reminded of my Asianness all the time. You know, someone once recently approached me, says, he first said something in German that I kind of understood. Then I said, excuse me? It was in one of the porn theaters. She's like, we don't like Asians in Germany. And I thought, oh, this is so weird, 2020 something, and you know, I'm still having, yeah, but I've dealt with this my whole life, so these days, it's a part of me existing on this planet, whether it's in the US or Germany. So I try not to let it affect me so much, and I don't really believe it really bleeds into the work so much. At least I don't think so.
But it does. I mean, I would
Please do.
agree with that, but I would kind of push back based on the way that you were talking about, like, not making sure that the work couldn't be attached demographically.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, I think there is a way in which, like, okay, so it's not about, like, representing Asianness or something that might be called that, but there's something about kind of demographic openness or something, you know, that might also be in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that.
It's certainly in the way that you talk about it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so what is it like then? Maybe I'll draw the question into the show too, which is, you know, this is a show that is organized very specifically to be a show of Asian American artists. And so what is that kind of context? And my colleague Jenny Lin is going to participate in a dialogue later on this month here about kind of shows in LA that are very specifically kind of around kind of racialized identitarian categories. So, you know, what is that, you know, what has that experience been like here, kind of in your hometown, to kind of be programmed in that kind of show by another artist? Yeah.
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 I mean, it's been great.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
to be in a show that's not about gay sexuality or queer sexuality is really kind of refreshing. When Anna first contacted me about the show, I was very excited. And I think there were maybe some artists, some people that, maybe not, some who were like, oh, you know, I don't, you know, is that just the, you know, is that the only thing that's connecting, But I was really into it. For me, it was really important to be in the show also because, you know, you had Simon Leong and Bruce Yonemoto, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like two different generations ahead of me. I think it was Out Magazine, but seeing Simon represented, I forgot what biennial it was. It was like 92?
It's actually the
93
93 biennial. This is the biennial that gets all the play. And actually, like, Simon Leong's piece doesn't, like, when you look at the literature, it doesn't break through because the work is really, I mean, it's there
Quiet.
and not there.
It's beautiful, I know.
Right.
But this was my first experience of Simon's work was through this catalog, working at MoCA, thinking, oh, this is an Asian name. What? You know, this is also someone who's dealing with sexuality. I was like, this is amazing. You know, at that time, there's very little Asian artists for me to identify with. And also later on that year, he was also in Out magazine or Advocate with Jack Pearson and Zoe Leonard, like these queer artists from in the art world. So, and eventually I got to work with Simon as he was one of my graduate mentors, undergraduate mentors at CalArts. So it was really kind of special to be finally be in a show with Simon. So that was very important. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the artists I've never met, but you know, this is Anna's circle. But the overlaps were really amazing. You know, I knew Na through Berlin, and a mutual friend, Bobby, who I went to CalArts with, is friends with Na, partners. So it's been this incredible feeling. And I saw the show for the first time Sunday. So it was really great. And I was one of the few people, so it was, yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, so hopefully it's okay that we took the question from kind of how does that kind of work when kind of recognized or kind of almost violently recognized in certain ways into kind of ways that are supportive and also provide different ways of kind of understanding and articulating kind of what your work is and is not about at various moments, right?
Or maybe this also can, I just thought of this, you know, like I don't really go to gay specific spaces anymore. I stopped years ago, but it's interesting because like I going into kind of spaces of desire, I'm either invisible or I'm attacked, right? Even if it's like a minor, like, you know, minor aggression, it's still, it's like one of the two. So I guess maybe that kind of gives you an idea of how I may navigate or not navigate within these spaces.
I think that's actually a pretty fulsome answer, actually. Yeah. Maybe one more, if there's one more. You can tell we can riff. Yeah, okay, yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk about the design of the book a little bit, because it's quite interesting. They're vertical photographs and it's a landscape book. The paper has a pretty pronounced texture to it, and the signatures are uncut. So I know we don't have the designer here, but I was hoping you can comment about it.
Yeah, you would have to talk to the designer. He presented several ideas. He knew about paper, he knew about book design, he knew about layout. I know nothing about that stuff. I'm pretty easygoing about, Antonia, I'm pretty easygoing about things generally. So I was very much about, I was very much about kind of like letting go and realizing this person knew more about design and publications than I did. And so with his suggestions, I was like, you know, I mean, the things I was a little more harsh about was just contrast, darkness, lightness with the actual photos.
What do you like about it? About the book? You know, like what is it that
I just saw it last night for the first time.
Yeah, but what do you? But you've said that you like what you see
beautiful.
a lot.
It's
Yeah,
an
so
object. It's a beautiful object that documents one of my favorite bodies of work that I've created so far. Yeah.
Yeah.
Period.
And we'll put a period on the program too. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.